to FC Tales, the podcast where football's most captivating stories come to life.
All right, welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a word that, well, if you're a football fan, you know this word. It's hooligan.
Yes.
And I think for most people out there, they probably associate it with violence and disorder, right? But have you ever thought about, like, where this word comes from?
Well, and that's the interesting thing, isn't it? The origins of the word, you might be surprised to find out, they actually go back further than the modern game of football that we know. Yeah, much further. They have their roots all the way back in 19th century London.
Wow. Okay. So we're going way back.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this. So I was looking at some of the source material that we've got for today, and this is pretty amazing. So apparently this word first appeared in a comic strip.
A comic strip.
A comic strip, yeah. And it was about a kind of a rowdy Irish family, and the family's name was, you guessed it, the Hooligans.
Oh, wow. Ironic, isn't it?
So, from the funny pages to the front lines of football mayhem.
Yeah. I mean, this fictional family, they were probably just meant for a bit of lighthearted fun, But they ended up kind of lending their name to real-life troublemakers, especially in the 1890s. That's when you had the rise of these street gangs in London. And newspapers, they really seized on that term, hooligan, to kind of sensationalize these groups and the anxieties that people felt about them.
Yeah, so it's almost like this word jumped right out of the comics and onto the streets.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey.
And then it didn't take long for it to become, well, official, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because in 1898, the London Daily News, they actually printed the word hooliganism.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the first documented use of this word in print. It's almost like, linguistic patient zero for this term that we know so well.
Yeah.
But okay, so we've got street toughs. We've got newspapers using this word. But how did it actually get tied to football?
Right. Well, for that, we need to kind of fast forward a little bit to the middle of the 20th century. This is when football's popularity was just exploding. And especially among the working class, match days, they became such a powerful outlet for people, just full of raw energy, tons of passion, tribal loyalties, but also, unfortunately, these simmering tensions that were sort of bubbling under the surface.
I can only imagine, like, what the atmosphere would have been like at these games. You got, the roar of the crowd, these fierce rivalries.
Oh, absolutely.
But was there anything specific about this period that made football such a breeding ground for trouble, for this word to really latch onto it?
Yeah, well, you have to remember that this is post-war Britain, and it was a period of really, really intense social change. And football, with its deep-rooted traditions, with those intense loyalties that we talked about, it kind of became this focal point for people's anxieties. The term hooligan was a convenient fit for journalists in the 60s and 70s. They sort of resurrected this word to describe the growing problem of fan violence that was happening at matches.
So the media's use of this word hooligan, it kind of amplified the problem then. Would that be fair to say? It created this image of football fans as being inherently unruly.
Yeah, it definitely played a role. The headlines were all about football hooligans, and, it kind of solidified that connection in the public mind. It's almost as if the word itself helped shape how people saw football culture. Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, almost. Yeah.
And then things got really bad, didn't they, in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
I read a little bit about some of the incidents that happened during that period, and it seems like English football was really kind of spiraling out of control at that point. Yeah.
It was a turbulent time, yeah. Stadiums, they were turned into battlegrounds. Clashes with police, they became pretty commonplace. It was a pretty dark period for English football. The whole world was watching as this fan violence escalated. And eventually, it culminated in a tragedy that would change the landscape of English football forever.
You're talking about the Heysel Stadium disaster,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
In 1985, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a story that, I know a little bit about, but I'd really like to get your take on its impact. What happened there?
Well, the Heysel disaster was a horrific event. It was triggered by hooliganism, and it resulted in the loss of 39 lives. It had huge repercussions. English football faced incredibly severe consequences because of this. Stricter laws, a really damaged reputation. They were even banned from European competitions.
Wow.
It was a very, very dark day for the sport.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine something like that happening. It really shows you just how bad things can get. When passion, like you said, boils over into violence, it's a scary thought.
Yeah.
But the story of the word hooligan doesn't end there, does it?
No, not at all.
It seems like it kind of transcended borders, right?
It did, yeah.
And took on a life of its own in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and while the Heysel disaster was definitely a turning point for England, things changed there. They brought in much stricter security. There was a real effort to curb the violence.
Yeah,
But the word itself, it kept spreading.
right.
Other fan groups adopted it far beyond England.
It's almost like a traveling word, isn't it? Carrying this baggage.
Yeah.
But also adapting to new contexts. And what's interesting to me is that hooligan doesn't always have the same negative connotation everywhere it goes, right?
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
You know, in England, for sure, the word is still really associated with violence and disorder. But in other parts of the world, particularly places like Eastern Europe, Latin America,
Oh, okay.
even Asia, the word's been embraced by these groups called ultras. And they see it as a badge of honor.
Ultra groups. I've heard that term. But could you maybe explain for people who haven't, what makes them different from your typical football fan?
Sure, yeah. They're highly organized, really intensely passionate fan groups, and they're known for these elaborate displays of support.
Oh, wow.
Lots of choreographed chants, flags, banners. They're deeply devoted to their clubs. They have a very strong sense of identity and camaraderie.
So for them, the word hooligan, it's not necessarily about violence.
Yeah.
It's more about intense loyalty,
That's right.
passionate support for their team.
Exactly. Think of groups like the Torcida Split in Croatia, known for their really fiery displays and their passionate chants. Or the Barra Brava in Brazil, famous for their choreography and their unwavering loyalty to their clubs.
Huh.
For these groups, hooligan can actually represent a commitment to their team that goes way beyond the casual fan. You know, it's about creating a spectacle, an atmosphere of intimidation, even awe, standing out from the crowd.
It's incredible how a word can carry such different meanings in different cultures, right?
Right.
It makes you think about how language itself can be shaped and reshaped
It really is.
by the people who use it.
It's a testament to how flexible language is. You know, its ability to adapt and evolve as it travels across these geographical and cultural boundaries.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's a reflection of how football itself, a global sport with shared rules, shared passions. It can manifest in such different ways depending on where you are in the world.
That's a really good point. And thinking back to how it all started, right, with this fictional family in a comic strip,
Yeah.
it's amazing to consider the journey that this word has taken.
It is.
It's been used to vilify, to sensationalize, to celebrate.
And that's what's so fascinating about it. Its complexity.
Right.
That's what makes this story so interesting. And it challenges us to think a little bit deeper, to look beyond those simple labels and easy answers and think about the nuances of language and culture. The word hooligan, it often has these negative connotations, but ultimately I think it reflects the really profound impact that football has had on people's lives and identities all over the world. It speaks to the power of that tribalism, the desire to belong, those really intense emotions that this sport can evoke.
So what about today? Has the threat of hooliganism in its more kind of violent form, has that truly subsided? Or is it still something that modern football has to worry about?
I think while English football has made huge strides in curbing the violence, that potential for unrest is always going to be there, especially in those high-stakes matches when rivalries flare up.
Of course.
So it's a constant balancing act
Yeah.
for clubs, for authorities. They want to encourage passionate support, but they also want to prevent things from descending into chaos.
Right.
Oh.
Right. And we can't ignore, the influence of social media these days.
That's right.
Which I feel like can play a big role in kind of amplifying those tensions and mobilizing groups so quickly.
Yeah, it's added a whole new layer of complexity to how these fan groups interact and organize.
So while we might not see those same large-scale kind of incidents of hooliganism that we did in the past, the potential for trouble, it hasn't gone away.
It hasn't vanished, no. And it's more about understanding those underlying dynamics,
Really?
recognizing the things that trigger unrest, and having measures in place to de-escalate situations before they get out of hand.
So being kind of proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly. It's about fostering this culture of respect and responsibility among fans, while also acknowledging that passion. When it's channeled appropriately, that's what makes football such a captivating spectacle.
Right. So it seems like the word hooligan is always going to be a part of football's vocabulary in some way,
I think so.
even if its meaning continues to kind of evolve and change?
Yeah, and as the sport evolves and as fan culture continues to shift, the meaning and implications of hooligan are going to be debated and redefined for years to come, I think.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful, I have to say.
Thank you.
I'm starting to see football in a whole new light after this conversation.
It's a reminder that words have power
Yeah.
and that their meanings can be shaped by history, by culture, even by the actions of individuals.
Wow. It's really amazing, isn't it? How one word, hooligan, can lead to such a wide-ranging conversation about history, culture, even the power of language itself.
It's fascinating, really. It just shows you that words, they're never static.
Right.
They carry, all this weight of history. But at the same time, they're always being reshaped by how we use them.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking back to everything that we've talked about,
Right.
from the streets of Victorian London
Right.
to modern day football, all over the globe.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners today?
I think it's to be really careful about those simplistic labels
Okay.
and those easy answers because, hooligan, it's a word that's so loaded with all these assumptions, preconceptions. And instead of just accepting those, at face value, I think we need to dig deeper, question the narratives that we're given, consider the different ways that a word like this can be used and interpreted.
It's so easy to get caught up in, the headlines, the stereotypes, but
Right.
there's always more to the story than that.
Always. And sometimes those hidden stories, they can be way more interesting than this simple version.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember too that behind every word there are real people with complex motivations and experiences.
That's right. Whether it's the street toughs of 19th century London
Right.
or the passionate ultra groups of today, there are human stories that are waiting to be uncovered. I think that's something important to remember.
Yeah. So to our listener out there, as you're, going about your day to day, think about the words you use, the labels you encounter. Maybe there's a hidden history there. Maybe there's a deeper meaning waiting to be explored. Who knew a deep dive into football could be so thought-provoking,
Right. It just goes to show you never know where a deep dive might take you.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And even a word as seemingly straightforward as hooligan
Yeah,
can open up a whole world of unexpected insights.
absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've journeyed through time, we've gone across continents, all thanks to the power of one word.
It's been a real pleasure.
And I hope that our listener has enjoyed the ride with us.
Yeah, me too.
Until next time, remember to keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep digging deeper.
Absolutely.